Could you just go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Uh, well, thank you. It's good to be on the program with you. I've spent 75% of my life here in Iowa. I spent 4 years in the military out in Virginia, at Fort Monroe, Virginia, another 4 years at Virginia Tech getting a marketing and communications degree out there. Came back to Iowa, got married, and the next thing you know, I was heading out to California working for an evangelist and did some outreaches for him in California and Colorado. Again, came back to Iowa again. And I stayed. I did spend 5 years in Cedar Rapids, started a business there. Then in 1990, I purchased an advertising agency here in Iowa where I had worked first thing out of college. And so it's an old ad agency. It's started in 1923. Most people don't think I'm that old, but it's been a good run and mostly help ag clients, helping them with their marketing.
And what made you decide to run for office?
Well, I've been governmentally involved for a long, long time. One of the things I've done for the last 30 years is I'm the founder and executive director of Thy Kingdom Come Ministries, which basically sponsors the annual Quad Cities prayer breakfast here in the Quad Cities. And that has always featured governmental leaders because our objective is to bless the city, bless leaders, because it's always been my thesis. You can have government without God, but you can't have good government without God. It's just absolutely impossible. So we had all sorts of governmental leaders. You know, the first guy who ever spoke at the prayer breakfast back in 1995 was Alan Keyes, who was running for president then. But we've had Elizabeth Dole, we've had Pat Robertson, we had Chief Justice Roy Moore. Last year we had our Arizona senatorial candidate, our lady down there, Terry Lake. She's actually from the Quad Cities, and she's a great lady. But so I'm concerned about doing whatever we can to be a blessing to our government and getting it rooted on solid foundations.
And so you're going to be facing, an incumbent come this June primary. Why make that decision? What would you like to see be done differently in Congress?
Well, the problem is that when a person doesn't do their job in the real world, they get fired. And Miller Meeks has not done her job. She's lied to us. She said she was a conservative. She's told us she's running as a conservative. She's trying to do the same thing right now, but she's anything but a conservative. That's like calling Hillary Clinton a conservative. She votes for all these disgusting anti-moral bills, whether like, for example, unconstitutional bills. For example, we got the FISA bill that allows the government to essentially, it's supposed to be about spying on foreigners, but they use it against us and they use it without any warrants. She and the rest of the whole Iowa contingent in Congress thought it was a great idea that FISA be extended into 2025 and they be allowed to harass us that way. But she doesn't seem to get it. She doesn't understand it. She's never apparently read the Fourth Amendment that protects us against all unlawful seizures without any warrants. And so, whether you're talking about something like that or you're talking about her complete disregard for the big issues, she's concerned about prescriptions while the whole world is concerned about the power grab that's going on in the White House. We've got an unlawful president who's just completely disregarding the Constitution. They've got this border problem that's not just a matter of a little policy change. He intentionally wants to destroy this country, create chaos, bring in as many foreigners and illegals as he possibly can, and not just bring them in across the border. He's flown in over 400,000 people from Qatar and from Turkey. We've got an absolute renegade. It's not just Biden because he barely knows what's going on, but his whole administration, whether it's Obama or the Chinese or whoever is running the executive branch. And Meeks does not get it. She goes down to the border for photo ops, never talks about the stuff about what can be done. In fact, in her campaign, she never talks about the issues, just always defending herself, what she thinks she's accomplished, trying to prove that she's a conservative when she's not. It's just, I can almost get excited and passionate about this, but this cannot go on. She just embarrassed herself before the whole nation last night in one of the hearings regarding COVID, got off into some sexist discussion totally botched the opportunity to actually get something done. It's just a disgrace. It's an embarrassment to Iowa. It's a disgrace to the office. It's a complete disregard for misuse of the time. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. She is doing a great job of shooting herself in the foot.
And if you are elected to Congress, what would kind of be that first piece of legislation or the first thing that you would like to get done?
Well, my main priority in going to Congress is the family. There's so many things that make our children and our grandchildren unsafe, whether with Democrats or Republicans. They're not safe in the womb. They're not safe in the schools. They're not safe from the drug addicts. They're not safe with the teachers. They're not safe with the medical professionals. You got medical professionals and teachers conspiring to convince the kids that they're really not one of the plumbing biological genders. You've got people that are making it unsafe just for our kids to be in school. Somehow the federal government, and I haven't figured this one out yet, but somehow through some non-coded just procedure based upon cooperation due to receiving money, our administrators have been emasculated. They cannot exercise discipline or accountability in the school. So you got kids getting beaten up in school all the time. All they do is send the beaten up one home to lick his wounds. And the bullies that beat them up in the bathrooms, they're continuing to operate and run the school. So the monkeys are now running the zoo. It's stuff like that just, you go, this can't exist. This just can't go on. And it can easily be changed because this doesn't have to be uncodified. It was never codified to begin. It's just manipulation because of receiving money. So that'd be one of the biggest things on the first agenda thing. But we as a nation need to get back to our foundations, and our foundations are in God. He is the one who can help us. He's the one who benevolently wants to make lemonade out of all this lemon juice that we've got. And he is so kind. He's not condemning. And people get embarrassed when you start talking about God. They call me a choir boy. They somehow think that I'm irrelevant. I just spend all my life behind stained glass windows or something. But no, this is the real person, God, who is here on this call right now, who 51 years ago began changing my life like no person could ever do. And that is where we start. That's what our founders said. John Adams says, it's impossible to have government without including God. So it's a big deal, but it's not impossible. I believe that, there's a British politician, a guy named Edmund Burke, who said that no man ever made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. Well, I'm one small person, one of 435 people who will be in Congress. But I believe that with the Lord's help, I can do a lot because I got two tools at my disposal. I've got the vote and I got my voice. And I will use both to bring about some decency and common sense into our country.
And now kind of switching over a little bit to some of the top issues facing Congress right now or soon. So kind of in regards to the Israel-Hamas war, what would you like to see Congress do here?
Well, Congress does not run Israel. Congress is Joe Biden is trying to manipulate Israel into caving in, but Hamas started this nasty thing. And Hamas and Israel can settle this all. In war, when one party prevails over the other one, it calls for the other one to surrender. Well, Hamas has been beaten up. They're bad, but they're too arrogant to just say, we surrender. And so they continue on getting beat up. There's nothing that Israel can do except keep fighting the war. Hamas just ought to surrender, called white flag, I surrender, and give themselves up, completely turn over the hostages. So Congress is not running Israel. Congress is here to support Israel, but Congress is here to let Israel govern itself. We can help them out with weapons and this and that. But we act like somehow we arrogantly assume that we're the ones who control Israel. You got Schumer calling for new elections. You got Biden saying they can't finish off the job. We ought to just stay out of it. And this is not Congress. This is the administration who doesn't have a lick of sense even how to run our own country, let alone how to run Israel.
And do you have any, thoughts or opinions on the new ICC charges against the Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders?
Well, it's just bogus. They have no authority over us. They can just go fly a kite, like they have any ability to really bring about justice. They're so leftist and so globalist without any concern for morals or what's really going on there. That they might as well just be demonstrating on the campuses alongside all the other students. They are irrelevant. They are weak. They are godless. They have no authority over us, and we can't even dignify their little petty complaints.
And then switching over to the border, you had mentioned it earlier. In regards to immigration, what action would you like to see Congress take, or what would you fight for?
Well, everyone thinks that Congress ought to do something about the border. I'm for anything that's going to stop what's going on down there, but most people don't have a clue what's going on. You have a renegade, treasonous president who will not obey any laws. He's actually has tried to take the governor of Texas to the Supreme Court to prevent him from defending his own borders. So it doesn't matter what legislation Congress passes, these guys will not follow any law. Their intent is to destroy the government and create chaos. So the only thing that can get the job done is to get a new president there just as soon as possible. It may be too late. We are in a situation that unless we get this election right, we don't have an opportunity for a redo. But the only thing that will get the border solved, and you could get it if you had Trump in president there today, within 24 hours, that border would be sealed because you have someone who's actually willing to utilize and obey his constitutional duties to protect and defend the United States. But you'd seal the border. Then you'd go after all the cartels down there, the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers. You'd use whatever force is necessary to destroy these rascals. And then you start deporting all the illegals who came in. If they want to come in, they can come in the right way. They can apply, but we're not going to be giving any special status to people who came in illegally. We will deport them. It may take a while, but we will deport them. But over 10 million that we know of, and they don't even know how many have come in under their nose without them realizing it. It could be as many 15 million. But people are so blind to what is going on down there. They think it's just a matter of policy differences. It has nothing to do with that stuff. But if Congress really wanted to get Joe Biden's attention, they could use the power of the purse to back him into the corner and say, you're not getting a dime for anything, including your own salary, until you get this thing fixed and do it according to these 3 points. But, we have this naive idea that somehow we have a president. He's not. He's bogus. He's fake. He didn't get elected properly. And we think that we have a president who wants to actually solve the problem. He doesn't. So we just need to get our heads out of the sand on that one.
And you just mentioned that you felt Biden didn't get elected properly. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's just the evidence is so clear. They call people like me election deniers, but the real election deniers are the people who deny that the election was fraudulent. Here's just some basic numbers. I can go into a lot of things. But, between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, there were 155 million votes cast, 84 for Biden and 81 for Biden and 74 million for Trump, 155 million. Now, this is just basic sixth grade maths. The only problem is that there were only about 115 million people who actually voted. As of the election time, there were 168 million registered voters, but we all know, just like clockwork, that only about 60% of those people ever vote. So even 115 million voters is probably a little high. But the question is, how do you get 155 million votes out of 115 million voters? It's impossible. The difference is all the fraudulent votes that were thrown in by the hacking of the Dominion computers, by the Dropbox violations, and every other form of corruption possible. The states were supposed to be in charge of the election, not the federal government. But you had a treasonous vice president who was too cowardly to actually question some of the crazy things that were going on. Statistically, it's impossible to have such a spike in voters overnight when they stop the counting of the votes, and when they resume, next thing you know, Biden is up another 10% versus being down. All the votes went to Trump. We know such insanity is impossible. But the election desire, the media has been complicit in this whole thing and spreading this false story. But just do those review that basic math. You don't get 155 million votes out of 115 million voters. Biden was sitting in the basement the entire election, probably comatose, and he somehow had more votes than any president in history. 181 million 81 million votes. Impossible. That just defies all basic common sense.
And then kind of jumping back up to immigration, I did have a follow-up with that. So even here in Iowa, we've started to see states kind of implement their own laws. Now, the one in Iowa is, currently held up in the courts. But do you think immigration is something that should be left up to the federal government, or do states have some room to, implement these laws?
Well, this is a question really about the role of the federal government. The federal government was never meant to be the masters over the state. The federal government was meant to be the servant of the states. And originally, the United States of America was spelled with a small u in United. It was not the monstrous tyranny of the federal government telling the states what to do. So, of course, the states ought to have control over immigration. The federal government can help to some extent, but the federal government is not going to be in a position to tell the states what to do. They have an obligation to protect their borders. And immigration, for the time being, ought to be completely stopped, except in special compassionate cases. There should be no more immigration. We have too many people that got in illegally. We just need to take control of the whole thing. But the states really ought to be the ones who are saddled with this problem. They ought to be the ones who are being given authority with the help of the federal government, where they're actually willing to be sane, to get this problem and get these people deported. And if they want to come in legally, apply legally.
And then inflation is another top of mind, voters. What do you think Congress should be doing to help with that? Is it a Congress thing?
Well, it's a whole government issue. It starts with the executive branch and continues with Congress, but Congress has shown no resolve, no concern for cutting spending. The inflation is not some big mystery. Inflation happens when you have too many dollars chasing too few goods. It's basic laws of supply and demand. You got Biden printing all this money, encouraging the spending of all this money, all this aid to Ukraine. We've only sent $175 billion to Ukraine, a country that has absolutely no national interest to ourselves. But you can solve the problem of inflation by cutting spending, getting things back to a normal state of expenditure. And normal for us is actually abnormal. We need to eliminate whole branches of government. You've got a federal budget that's somewhere over about $7 trillion, and over half of that is untouchable because it's entitlement stuff: Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. But with what's left, you can go about eliminating these departments and save. You got basically about $3 trillion to pay with. You can get rid of a lot of these branches of government overnight because they're doing more harm than good. They are providing some services, but like Department of Education, Department of Homeland Services, the EPA, and then you throw in the Department of Justice and FBI, who are just criminalizing, using their powers for lawfare to harass the citizens, even little people who attend school board meetings. But we can cut a lot of government spending. The government is currently the biggest employer in the United States, bigger even than Walmart. We don't need this many employees. The federal government is just grown beyond its usefulness. And get it back to a manageable size where it's serving the states, and just that. It was originally, the federal government was meant to do those things that the states couldn't do efficiently by themselves, primarily military defense. So we can start cutting spending, whereas we have just created this monster of inflation by overspending with all this fiat currency that they just print. Get back to the gold standard. Let our currency mean something.
And one of those programs that you mentioned at the first half of your answer was Social Security. There's been a lot of concern that Social Security won't be able to be funded in a couple of years. What are your thoughts on that program? And, if you support it and would like to keep seeing it, how do you keep it going?
Well, we need to be people of our word. We promise them this stuff. We need to keep it going. And we can keep it going. If we cut all the unnecessary spending, we could probably afford these things. The Social Security was never meant to be part of the federal budget. It was a ancillary, auxiliary stash of cash that was meant to help people in retirement years. But now it's part of the federal budget. I'd say get it back out of the budget and just get it funded self-sufficiently. LBJ thought, hey, got all this money sitting around, we'll use it the cash flow of the government. And of course, that was a disaster because it now became part of the IOUs of government, which are meaningless. But we need to take care of the elderly. We've already messed around with them. Biden has just totally obliterated so many of our elderly. I'm 70 years old. I guess I get fit in that category. But people who are on fixed income, they've been penalized, and their buying power has been diminished, and they're trying to make ends eat. Here you got candidates like my opponent boasting about the $2 million in their campaign account to people who can have a tough time just paying for gas, bread, and milk. It's just insensitive, but I will help I am not going to abandon the elderly. We will see that it gets done. It start by taking Joe Biden's salary and distributing that.
And then on the topic of abortion, do you think that is something that should be left up to the states or the federal government? And if you believe the federal government, if you're elected, would you support some sort of abortion ban?
Well, the question, I understand it, but the question is basically uh, um, unconscionable when you get right down to it, because I am for anything that will stop the murder of babies. It's not a matter of splitting hairs whether the federal government does or the states. Everyone ought to do it. Everyone. It just ought to be so obvious that we don't even need legislation for it. Well, how did we ever become such a barbaric society that we thought it was plausible, it was proper to kill babies in the womb? They have a heartbeat that starts at about 17 days. You can't detect it until later. But this is a living person, little babies that suck their thumbs in the womb. These are people. How did we ever become so callous that we ever thought it was fine to kill off these human beings? They're fearfully and wonderfully made. I mean, it just makes me cry to think about it. They're human beings. I would never be authorized to kill my neighbor just because he was an inconvenience to me, because he didn't cooperate with my borders. It's just unthinkable. So I'm for anyone that will do something about it. We can't continue on being such a barbaric society that has no right, no concern for these babies. All the feminists and the liberals who talk about the government has no right to my body. Get your hands off my body. Well, that baby is saying, get your hands off my body. I've got a right. This is not just some blob of cells and tissues. It's a real human being. And I want to get to the real issues. We can't be condemning these women who get pregnant. Maybe some do it for dumb reasons. Some do it for, they didn't plan right. We're not here to condemn them for getting pregnant. What we're here to do is come alongside them and help them. There are 2 million couples that would like to adopt every year, but only 115,000 adoptions ever happen in a given year. Well, why can't we do something to connect the unwanted with the wanting? Can't we come alongside these pregnant mothers and support them and do whatever we can to support them during the pregnancy? Some women feel like they have to choose between keeping the baby and a job. Why can't we financially help them? Why can't we hook them up with caring organizations that will walk them through this pregnancy and be of source to them? Some of these dear ladies have been abandoned by men who they got them pregnant and they don't care anything more about helping them. That's nasty. But we can help them. We can get these babies connected to folks that want to raise them and bring them up. So this doesn't, I mean, think about that. There are about over 900,000 babies that are aborted every year, but there's twice as many parents that want them. it shouldn't be that complicated. I mean, no issue is just a cakewalk, but it shouldn't be that complicated to, with communication and love and care and respect, get these babies into homes where they're wanted.
And then another issue facing Congress right now is this the new farm bill. Is there anything specific that you would try to get in the farm bill if you were elected?
Well, it would help if people even understood what the farm bill is. Most of the funding in it doesn't even have anything to do with the farm. The Democratic opponent who wants to run for the congressional seat, Christina Bohannon, she doesn't apparently has never even understood what the farm bill is about. She thinks it's all about farmers. Well, I'm all for farmers. I work with farmers. I mean, we can in there are provisions for crop insurance and set aside lands and this and that. We want to help the farmers. We want to protect them from all this environmental stupidity that would rob them of their lands through the CO2 pipeline. But the farm bill primarily has to do with aid to dependent children and mothers and this and that. And if I'd like to see anything change on that, which is the big whopping part of this whole thing, is that I'd like to get people in a situation where they have to work to receive some of this aid. We just have to end all these brazen handouts. The Bible says if a man won't work, don't let him eat. Simple. And so rather than just handing things out, there are things that people can do. Work is a real gift. It's a dignifying, it's a purposeful thing. And when people don't work and they are not engaged in productive activity, their sense of worth and their self-image plummets. They don't want just handouts in reality. They want to be part of something productive and purposeful and helpful. So the farm bill ought to be structured, and I understand they just passed it yesterday. I haven't seen what's all in there, but I don't know if they've got any incentives in there for people to working or just more handouts. But it's amazing that the level of ignorance that operates in people who aspire to be leaders in our government don't even know what the bill is. Oh my.
And so one thing Senator Grassley has said is that he would like to see more farm in the farm bill. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, absolutely. It started out the farm bill. Why? Because stuff loaded into it and all. They got to be separated out. And these bills that they come up with are comedies. Well, you've seen some of this stuff. The way they have the complete antithesis of what they're about, like the Debt Reduction Act. It was no Debt Reduction Act. It was a debt increasing act. Yes, we need to help farmers because, the first dollars come right out of the ground. Farmers are some of the best people on the planet. They assume huge risk. There's about 1,000 things that can go wrong during any planting season, and they need the protection. They need the crop insurance. They need to understand what good farming is all about. They need to be acquainted with best practices, and we need to do whatever we can to help them with this. But there's a whole lot more nutrient in the ground than we actually realize. And so the chemical companies, they're just in a conspiracy just to foist off more chemicals, had the farmers buy more of this and more of that, pesticides, herbicides, more nitrogen, the NPK routine. And but it doesn't have to be such a environmentally threatening thing. We can reduce the cost, the use of nitrogen 50%, almost just like rolling over your sleep, if you learn something about how to get more nutrient out of the ground. And I work with a company that knows how to do that, amazingly.
And then, like you had mentioned earlier, sorry. Like you had said earlier, there's a big general election coming up for president. Donald Trump hasn't officially, endorsed your opponent. He has come out and said some encouraging words about you. Where do you kind of stand with Donald Trump? Are you supporting him? And what's that relationship kind of like?
Oh, yes, I definitely support him. I met him, talked to him 3 times. Met him the first time in Cedar Rapids when he was at a rally there. I was part of a minister's prayer group before the rally. When I had some little bit of time with him, I said, yes, I'm David Pautsch. I'm a Gold Star father. I'm running for Congress against Miller Meeks. He says, you get a primary Miller Meeks? I said, yes, sir. He says, she's horrible. Well, he knows so because she voted to certify the false presidential election of 2020. She voted to establish the January 6th Select Committee, which basically is an attack against President Trump and the protest, not the insurrection. No, President Trump and I have gotten along very good. He called me a very good man when he came to Davenport about 3 days later. And he was asked if he was getting endorsement. He said, well, that'd be risky. That'd be a bigger thing. But I can tell you this, David is a very good man. Well, obviously, he's one of the most perceptive people you could ever meet. And but nonetheless, it is a risky thing for him to endorse any primary candidate. And I think our Congress as a whole needs to get past this idea that the majority is more important than the message and that the power is more important than the principle. I understand people wanting to keep a majority, but the fact of the matter is we have a fake majority in Congress. The Republicans are not in charge. The Democrats are. Hakeem Jeffries, the majority leader of the minority leader of the Democrats, he says, oh, we're the ones who control the House. We supply all the votes because you got half the Republicans voting with the Democrats most of the time. And so they're concerned about keeping the majority. They don't want to just throw the election up for grabs. But Meeks is doing a pretty good job of getting herself fired just by her own moves and her belligerence and unwillingness to vote like a conservative Republican. She is not. So, I think there's a lot of weakness that's displayed when people are unwilling to endorse candidates based upon their message and not just what they're going to do for the majority. So, but Donald Trump and I are right. The fact is, I don't need his endorsement to get elected. I've had plenty of help from Miller Meeks to get the job done.
Awesome. Well, that just about covers all of my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, just a note about why I'm running. I'm running because there's a lot of problems in this country, but I'm running to honor the Lord. He's the first person I want to please. I'm also running to honor my sons who gave it all. My oldest son fought in Afghanistan. He was involved with firefights every day. He was on patrol, and he had to endure Obama's pulling of his close air support when they got ambushed, because he's more concerned about the Afghan people and their buildings than his own troops. So he got a face-to-face encounter with what it is to have a treasonous president as the commander-in-chief. And Biden isn't any different. Look at the fiasco he did over in Afghanistan. But I'm running to honor the sacrifice that my sons made. My other son, Jason, my second oldest son, he's over in Iraq in Mosul. And he was killed over there on Good Friday of 2009. And he was doing what he enjoyed. The night before he was killed, he called me up and he said, Dad, I'm thinking about re-enlisting. He says, I don't want to be arrogant. He says, but I think I'm really good at what I do. And I believe he was. And so these guys, obviously near and dear to my hearts, and they deserve to be recognized, and they fought for you and me, and we can question some of the causes that our country has got us involved with, but they answered the call, and my oldest son, he's still suffering under the effects of all this exposure to combat with some PTSD and the like, but they're great, and I love them, and I'm running to honor them.
Well, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me.